I'm Shanna. I'm here with Jill and Tina and Claude, and we just finished up our restorative circle discussion on Holy Hurt episode 3. So, wanted to just share a little bit of our thoughts with you. I'll do a quick summary of the episode. This episode we learned a lot about trauma and how sometimes it's the result of one single distinct event with a clear before, during, and after. But more often than not, spiritual trauma happens in a very complex, layered way over a long period of time. And because of that, spiritual abuse and spiritual wounds can be very hard to identify. They may show themselves in unexpected ways, and it may just feel normal to us. We may not be able to see the abuse. So, in this episode, Dr. McBride identified very specifically some different spiritual wounds that we may have and the many symptoms we may notice in our minds and bodies as a result of those wounds. So I encourage you to go listen to the episode. And she also talks about how we can approach these wounds and this hurt that we feel with gentleness and compassion rather than judgment. So I'll just open it up. If one of you want to jump in with any takeaways that really resonated for you from the episode this week.
There was so much in this episode. I loved this episode. I thought it was just such a beautiful metaphor. Um, One of the things that stood out for me was that, especially when she was talking about how that when we know what the impact of this wound is, it can lead us towards self-compassion and help us to understand what it actually takes to heal the wound. But then she added that in knowing that, we can also come to that with judgment, especially because we've been trained to use judgment as a tool for assessment. And I thought, like, how true that is, and how often, maybe I've looked at my own, as she references in the podcast, shards of glass. I come to it with this sense of judgment, like, oh, you're overreacting. Stop being so sensitive. It's not that big of a deal. And so just recognizing that within myself, um, and how that's showing up for me when I'm looking at these wounds. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that, Jill. That really resonated for me too. Like, and made me aware of like my own self-talk, even like when I see things come up that are wounds, how am I talking to myself about that? And I love people shared some different mantras in our discussion group tonight that they use to help them to kind of reframe that. I'll just mention a couple that were talked about. I am enough. I have enough. I am safe. That story is over. If you guys have any other ones, feel free to add, but those were ones that have been helpful for several people.
Yeah, I really like I really like the I am safe one because that's always a good reminder, especially, and we talked to about our inner child, and you mentioned a family model, inner family model, I think, which I have also done some work with my therapist with that, and it's really incredible actually how helpful it is to speak to that inner child and just like let them know that they're not forgotten, and like what they went through was valid, and that we like even recognizing that that inner child is still inside of us, and like we can, so much that we do is a reaction to trying to make up for things that happened to us when we were children. And yeah, I was also just thinking too, like a lot of what we experienced was because we were brought up by people who were brought up with the same kind of wounds that we have, right? And a lot of us, we know, like some of them are, they're still not addressing those wounds. And so it just is like, we talked about in the first episode, the power of stepping away, and like we're breaking that circle. So that's so important.
Yeah, I like what you said about inner child, Tina. One thing that's been helpful for me, sometimes it's even hard for me to access my own inner child. Um, and so one thing that's helped me is I sometimes picture my own kids. My therapist just used that as a tool with me too. Like if your kids were in this situation or you were talking to your children, what would you say? And it for some reason that just makes it so clear to me what I would say to them and how I would treat them. And then I can take that and bring it back to myself.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I went through a really hard time for a number of years because of something my sister went through that I blamed myself for. And I was 7 when it happened, or when it was happening. And even though even now, like that is something that I've tried to do, or even just to try and think of like any other 7-year-old child, I would never have expected them to be in a position to protect this 4-year-old. But it's yeah, it's hard. It can be really hard. Um, I don't know if, because I've always thought, well, if you just like maybe think of another 7-year-old, but I don't know if I was to think about my own children, if maybe that would help me to unlock that self compassion because it's been hard for me to find that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've not done that exercise myself, and I found it interesting to hear people mention it and how healing it could be. And when I heard people discussing it, I thought about how I would approach it because I find that maybe not only can I not make contact with my inner child, I find that I feel like I'm dissociated from myself. Like I'm not sure that I'm really in touch with myself to know how to react, how to speak to myself, even in the present day, much less, the child version of me or the teen version of me or college version of me. Like it seems like there's so much divorcement from, how I feel, what I feel, and being able to acknowledge it, being able to tap into that. And, one of the things that is mentioned in the episode is that feeling of dissociation, like that separation from your feelings, is a common aspect of people in high control situations. And that it oftentimes that dissociation from your feelings is taught as a goal. It's like it's a holiness. It's a mark of holiness, uprightness, spiritual maturity, to be separated from your feelings, to process things in this kind of divorced way, this very kind of maybe aloof to your own feelings, and to be able to separate from your emotions and your feelings as you go through things. Like that is what's recommended. And as I thought of that, like I not only did I think of my own reactions and how I am unable or often incapable of getting in touch with my own feelings and my own emotions, but it made me think actually about this church's crisis. And just like there are so many people that it seemed strange to me that they couldn't be in touch with anger about what they learned. Like they couldn't be in touch with feeling hurt for someone else that was hurt. They couldn't seem to be in touch with being upset about something that was obviously wrong. And when you were upset, it was you that was pointed to as the person who was irrational, who was incorrect, who had the wrong approach, overreactive. And like it's, whereas for me, it seemed like the things that we learned were so unjust that really the only true reaction would have been anger, upset, sadness, depression, to lash out, to be enraged. But behaving in such a way was actually, seen as unnatural, as was not the way to behave. And then because you're in that kind of environment, when those are the lessons, you're taught then to begin to divorce yourself from your feelings. And once you're able to completely dissociate and divorce yourself from your feelings, like that is lauded. That's the thing that's told to you is the best thing. And so it just, I found that when I considered that, that not only am I often incapable of doing that, but it seemed like so many of the people that it seems that I would be frustrated with that couldn't really seem to grasp the depth of the thing I was bringing to them, that maybe they themselves are also dissociated from themselves, dissociated from their feelings. And so I thought that was a really interesting thing.
That stood out to
Well,
me too, Claude. Just KJ Ramsey, she interviewed her and she had a quote. She said to her, the diminishment of humanness being handed down as spiritual maturity is one of the worst parts of spiritual trauma. And that's exactly what you were talking about. Um, and it causes so much damage.
mhm. Well, and just reminding ourselves as well that that's often a protective measure that, as I was talking about this internal family systems therapy, there is a protector part of ourselves that kind of takes charge and causes us to dissociate from some of those painful and intense emotions, often because the protector feels that we're not ready for it. So, that's part of it, right? And I think that's what we're seeing with a lot of these people who are not really acknowledging what's happening. It's a form of protection because internally their body is telling them that you can't handle this. You're not ready to handle this. Um, but I love what she says in the podcast. She talks about healing, how it can be a gentle and graceful and slow process, but other times it's painful, it's intense, and it's uncomfortable. And it
Mm.
takes courage to stay with the process, kind of riding out those two, dichotomies,
I
right? So, um, yeah.
I
So
love
just,
that, Jill. That's
hmm
yeah.
I wonder too, if part of some of the things that makes it harder, maybe like just thinking with this inner child thing, is that we gave children adult responsibilities about their own spirituality. And I'm
hmm
just realizing myself, like for my own ability not to reach my inner child, can sometimes be because I was never really allowed to be a child. Like I've learned now about something like parentification because you have a child taking on the role of a parent and taking on the responsibilities. But like we were letting 8-year-olds make their decision about their whole spiritual future, and and like letting them feel like if they didn't profess that that they were going to go to hell and those types of things, and their children. So in a sense we were taking away some of their and it's funny because we'd say like childlikeness is so prized, right? Like it's such a quality to strive for, and yet we weren't allowing our children to be children.
Mm.
Wow, Tina. Yeah.
And even the way that children were allowed to be children, like what was seen as a desirable trait of children. Like
Oh
for
yeah, well
our
behaved,
meeting,
quiet.
it was behaved, quiet, set very still, right? You should the best behaved child and the best, most childlike and best child was the one that could sit motionless for meeting and even, forego going to the bathroom as long as possible so they could sit still at
hmm
meeting. Like that was a mark of a good child. Whereas you realize that that's somebody in a business meeting. That's not an 8-year-old or a 7-year-old or a 10-year-old. So even in those things, kids weren't even allowed to be kids in that. And so like that was another aspect I thought was interesting, that some of these treatments that we internalized and accepted as just part of our experience, just natural course of life, were actually abusive parts of the system that we came to accept. And then to Shanna's original point in starting out is that we have these complex multiple layers that form the basis of our trauma. And that's why, because you have all of these different experiences, different lessons, different encouragements or pressures and indoctrinations, trainings to encourage you to be a certain way. And none of them is really overt or forceful or hostile. It's nudges or gentle or silent looks or avoiding looking at you, speaking to you or not speaking to you. These different subtle things that don't really feel like mistreatment. They just seem like they're supposedly subtle hints, but they're actually harmful. And so you internalize that, and then that's the makeup of your abuse, and you don't even realize that that's what you've been experiencing, that that's what you've been enduring. And so now when somebody asks you, how do you feel that you were spiritually abused, you can't really point to any one thing. You can't really point to anything that seemed like overtly damaging or harmful. But even in simple things like that, just having kids not even be allowed to fidget or move or play loudly with toys in another room was something that we took as natural, which is actually very unnatural. It's a very unnatural expectation for a child.
And I think to your point, Claude, a lot of the abuse came through silence, like the things that we were not allowed to speak about or question. And it came through subtleties, like things that were never explicitly spoken, but it was very, very clear. It came through what we saw. Um, so when we saw, I'll give an example that this came up for me a few years ago, as a wound for me. And I just was realizing that for my entire childhood, I saw only men sitting on the platform at convention, only men speaking for 45 minutes. And as a child, I internalized that. And the message it gave me without any words was that women could not be as spiritually mature or wise as men. I now obviously know that's not true at all, but that message was very strong
Mm.
without any words being spoken.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing, I don't know if this is related, but one of the things my therapist said to me is like, do, like, do you ever just allow yourself to be silly? And
Mm,
I don't. um, it's just something I don't know how to do,
Mhm.
yeah.
and it's just realizing that there's so many reasons for that, like even this, the meeting situation and the responsibilities and everything. Yeah. So
Yeah, and even
it's
your
not a bad
responsibility
thing.
as you went out.
So just even now, like she's like, it's not a bad thing to learn how to do that, even as an adult, which it's really hard to break down those
Yeah.
barriers.
That is hard, Tina. That resonates with me a lot too. But like Claude was saying, I think back to myself. I professed when I was 11, and to be expected at 11 to share something from the Bible, and like you're expected to come across like you know something,
Mm-hmm.
right? I didn't know anything. I needed people who would teach me.
Yeah.
That's what I
Yeah.
needed, right? But I was expected to be very serious and confident. Um, and it just doesn't make sense now that I know more about how kids grow and learn and develop. They needed to be asking questions and having conversations and getting really curious about things.
Yeah.
And then, like you're saying, you wanted someone to, or needed someone to teach you. If you said, I don't understand and I need someone to teach you, it would have been put back on you that, well, you need to pray more or just spend more time with your Bible, and then the Spirit will. So, in essence, the short version is the problem is you.
Yeah.
And I think that was another part that she mentioned in this episode, that oftentimes things that you identify as problems, it's flipped back on its head, and it's pointed back at you and said, no, you're the problem. You're the reason that this thing isn't working. And so you end up blaming yourself. You end up internalizing blame because often things that don't make sense or things you need assistance with, it whatever your organization is, high control organization is, will tell you that the reason that it's not working for you is you. It's not the situation. It's not the request. None of those things are unreasonable. It's just it's something you're not doing. It's something you're not living up to. And so you're the one that's the problem. It's not anything else that's the problem. And so that there's that judgment. I don't know if we've mentioned that, or I think we have, just that being taught lessons in judgment, and like when we're hurt, that we don't need more judgment in healing. And I think that resonated with me too, because what she said was that, like, judgment is the thing that hurt you. So you don't need more of the thing that hurt you. You need the opposite. Like what you needed love and care. But the thing that hurt you was judgment. And you're trained and programmed in such a way that your reaction is judgment and harsh treatment. But that's the thing that hurts you in the first place, so that won't heal you. The thing that will heal you is love and care and gentleness. And it just like to train myself to react with love and care and gentleness and patience when that really wasn't the lessons that I recall. It was high expectations, lots of pressure, judgment, right? But to get to that healing and to make that love and care the reaction, like that's the thing that will help us recover.
And I think one thing that has helped so much this past year and a half has been finding people that will do that for me too, right? Like, I'm so thankful for the support we've had on CCF and smaller chat groups and different friends that I've had conversations with, and this Holy Hurt discussion group that we have, where we can do that for each other and we can just hold that hurt together and be gentle with it and love each other without any judgment. It's incredibly beautiful.
Well, thanks again, everyone.
Yeah,
It's
thank you.
great.
Thank you
Another
guys.
wonderful discussion. We'll see you all in 2 weeks.
Sounds
That
See you
good.
sounds
then.
Thank you.
good. Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys.
Bye.
Bye.